Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with me, Sydney Timmins. And today I am extremely excited to welcome back the Secret Psychiatrist.
Hello, I am the Secret Psychiatrist. I'm a psychiatrist working in London under the NHS, and I have been invited to talk on these podcasts with the Mental Health Book Club as an expert within psychiatry to answer some factual information, as well as giving you some tales of personal stories that I've had with patients. You can also find me on my website, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as the Secret Psychiatrist.
And I will make sure I put all of those into the show notes so that you can get to the right places if you want to. So today's podcast is in relation to the last book that we reviewed, which was Sugar by Deirdre Riordan Hall. And similar to what we did with My Courage to Tell, I thought at this point it would be a good thing just to give you a quick synopsis of what this book was about. So it goes: I'm the fat Puerto Rican Polish girl who doesn't feel like she belongs in her own skin, or anywhere else for that matter. I've always been too much and yet not enough. Sugar Legowski Garcia wasn't always fat, but fat as what she is now at age 17. Not as fat as her mama, who is so big she hasn't gotten out of bed in months. Not as heavy as her brother, Skunk, who has more meanness in him than fat, which is saying something. But she's large enough to be the object of ridicule wherever she is. At the grocery store, walking down the street, and at school. Sugar's life is dictated by taking care of Mama in their run-down home, cooking, shopping, and, well, of course, eating. A lot of eating, which Sugar hates as much as she loves. When Sugar meets not Evan, his nearly illiterate father misspelled his name on the birth certificate, she has the new experience of someone seeing her and not her body. As their unlikely friendship builds, Sugar allows herself to think about the future for the first time. A future not weighed down by her body or her mother. Soon Sugar will have to decide whether to become the girl that even helps her see within herself, or to sink into the darkness of the skin-deep role her family and her life have created for her. So, again in this book, so many things going on. So I don't know where you want to start, really.
Okay, so some of the elements that came out is obviously eating disorders.
Yes.
And what I think I'll do is I'll talk about generally what eating disorders are, some of the physical symptoms, some of the investigations, some of the abnormalities you find, and just a few general information facts about it. And then I'll touch on quite briefly about the three main ones that people should be aware of. So anorexia, nervosa, bulimia, and binge eating.
Sounds fantastic.
So what is eating disorders? It's when you have some sort of abnormality in your eating habits. So some of the physical symptoms you can have, they're quite diverse. So you can have increased sensitivity to the cold. You can feel dizzy. You can feel faint. Quite poor sleep patterns, you can feel constipated.
So I would assume that there would be differences between people that are binge eating and those that aren't eating?
So obviously the symptoms go with if you're eating too much or too little food. So if you imagine, if you're not eating enough, you're not going to be putting on adequate weight. So you will be feeling more cold, quite weak as in yourself. Therefore you might be feeling faint as well. So there's things to keep in mind. And also if you're eating too much, you're going to feel quite bloated in yourself and you might physically be bloated as well.
So what are the physical signs for people that are suffering with eating disorders?
So some of the objective physical signs you can get, again, they're quite diverse. You can get dry skin, lanugo. I never say that correctly, but that is essentially when you have fine hair on your body. So if you imagine a woman who quite underweight, she might have very fine hair on her chest, on the side of her face, on her back. That's because the body is trying to keep warm, obviously, to have more hair and to keep the air particles between the hair follicles. You can get orange skin, and that's from hyperkeratinemia. And basically you get excess keratin, and that's if you're eating quite a lot of raw foods like carrots or butter squash. So quite an excess amount, and so your skin goes a sort of orange colour.
I think back in the day it was Sunny D that caused some people to go,
oh, I
yeah,
remember.
do you remember that? And it was all over the news. Orange. Yeah, because of excess Sunny D consumption.
Because people were just knocking that back though, like water.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not an orange juice, you know, it's a
nice
sort of
sugar hit
drink.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh gosh, yes. Walking twiglets, really.
Yeah.
You can also get Russell sign, and that's when you get calluses on your knuckles. So if you're vomiting a lot and you're putting your fist in your mouth to try and induce vomiting, you're going to have marks on your knuckles. So that's what Russell sign is. You can have swelling of your parotid and submandibular glands. So that's just on your face. And that also might be related to if you're vomiting quite a lot. You can get perimyelitis, which is the erosion of your front teeth surface. So if you're vomiting a lot, the acid's going to essentially erode the front of your teeth. So that's something to keep in mind. You can have hypothermia, so being quite cold. And again, that goes with if you're not putting adequate weight on. You can have something called bradycardia. So what that means is we all have a normal heart rate. And it varies, but textbooks sort of say 60 to 100 for your heart rate pulse per minute. And bradycardia is when you have less than a normal heart rate. So say about 40, okay, below 50, we'd be concerned and call it bradycardia. You can get cardiac arrhythmias, and you would get that because of electrolyte abnormalities. So your sodium, your potassium in your blood. You can have hypotension. What that means is you have low blood pressure, again, because of not adequate intake of water or food. You can get weak proximal muscle wasting and weakness as well. You can get hypoglycemia. So what that means is your sugar levels are below what they should be. So that also could increase your risk of fainting, for instance. And also you can get osteoporosis. So that increases your risk of having fractures because, again, you're not having the adequate electrolyte intake and your imbalance is not correct.
So all of that to me sounds quite serious. So eating disorders really shouldn't be taken lightly because of all of the impacts that the eating disorder is having upon that individual's body. It sounds pretty extreme. Are there any other signs that you would be looking for if someone was presenting with an eating disorder?
So some of the things you can see on investigations. So when you have an ECG, so an electrocardiogram, and what that is you have leads that are connected to your chest, and all that does, it sort of looks at how your heart is beating and if that's functioning correctly. And there can be problems on the ECG, which would go with if you're having arrhythmias. You can have decreased colonic motility. So essentially your gut is not working effectively. And that can be secondary to people using chronically laxatives. So it will affect your motility of your gut and your stomach. You can have acute gastric dilation, essentially your stomach getting bigger. And that, again, can be secondary to binge eating. You can get something called pseudoatrophy, and that's from undernutrition. And what that is essentially wasting away of your cells in your brain, which I always feel I'm getting when I do night shifts, to be honest. But anyway, that is correctable. And that's corrected by weight gain and eating effectively. You can have a type of anemia called normocytic normochromic anemia. And that's just a form of anemia. And for those that are just interested in more detail, that's just when your concentration of your hemoglobin is within the range, but there's insufficient number of red blood cells. So that's just for those that are just interested in a bit more information. You can also get thrombocytopenia, leukopenia, so decrease in number of white blood cells, platelets.
So someone who has an eating disorder will have issues with their ability to fight infection.
You can get hypophosphatemia, so less normal phosphate as well. And that again goes with, vomiting, laxative use. And of note, if you're vomiting a lot because of your eating disorder, you can get metabolic alkalosis.
So basically the body is at a particular pH, which is about 7.35 to 7.45. And with alkalosis, what happens is that pH increases, and that can cause havoc with the rest of your body systems.
That can result in low potassium, because obviously if you imagine you're vomiting things up, you're vomiting your electrolytes in a way because nothing's getting in your body. And if you're using laxatives excessively, you can get metabolic acidosis.
So metabolic acidosis equally causes havoc within your body systems, but instead of the pH rising like in alkalosis, the pH in your body decreases, so it becomes more acidic.
So you can get decreased levels of sodium, hyponatremia that's called, or decreased levels of potassium, which is called hypokalemia. And these two things, metabolic alkalosis or acidosis, is very dangerous because you have enzymes in your body, and if they're not at the correct buffer, in a way, of what they should be in the baseline, it can really affect your system, and putting your body under extreme pH levels of acidosis, alkalosis is very dangerous for your metabolic system as well.
So what are the different factors that could result in someone developing an eating disorder? So what's the etiology?
Now, I'll talk about the etiology of eating disorders in general. It's 12 times increased risk of incidence of eating disorders if you have it in your family. So if your family members have eating disorders, you are increased risk by 12 times.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. And it's quite high if you think about it.
It's huge.
Very, very big. There's also been a link with parenting styles. So typically, and it's shown in films, and in a way it is true. So if you have an increased risk of very rigid parents or overprotectiveness, enmeshment, that can also increase your risk of eating disorders because of the way you're handling stress with these interactions of those in the family.
And are there any cultural differences?
Typically, Western culture is more likely to be at risk of having eating disorders than non-developed countries.
That's interesting as well, isn't it?
I mean, there can be a number of reasons why. I mean, is it because of the portrayal of how women and men should be looking, being a certain weight, all these models, film, media, and it's becoming sort of a norm that you should be looking a certain way, you should be wearing certain clothes.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of fits in really with some of the things that I've been reading about binge eating, is that as a result of having binge eating, people tend to ask certain questions such as, is my body normal? That they believe that they need to be a certain shape, a certain size to be valued, loved and be worthy. And that other people are judging them because of their weight. I know that personally I have felt judged as a result of my weight by others, and even members of my own family judge me as a result of my weight.
And maybe in non-developed countries, I mean, they've got other things on their mind, such as starvation, they've got political issues. I'm sure they don't, if they have food, that is sort of a life and death situation.
It's a bonus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of social image works with body image and how people see themselves, which you don't normally find in developing countries.
So that information is all about eating disorders in general. Are there any differences between the three main types of eating disorders? So that's the anorexia nervosa, bulimia and binge eating.
So the differences between the three main sort of eating disorders people know about, so which are bulimia nervosa, anorexia nervosa and binge eating. So let's talk about bulimia first. So bulimia and anorexia are very similar, but there's a key difference, and that is with the BMI, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the diagnostic criteria for bulimia nervosa are, they're a range, but it could be you're craving for food, you're dreading the idea of being fat, so dread of fatness, binge eating, so eating in small sort of time periods and just binge eating, so it could be snacks excessively. You're preoccupied with food and eating. You're thinking about it so much, and then you're trying to get rid of your fat. So once you've eaten, you might try and vomit, so you might get the Russell sign, which I mentioned on your hand. You're using laxatives, again affecting your metabolic and your electrolytes.
So did you want to tell us a bit more about the BMI factor in eating disorders?
So you have something called a BMI, so that's a body mass index. So if you take a person, everybody has a range. So just like when you're growing up, a child goes in the normal graph of what's normal for their height and weight. So with an individual, men and women have different ranges, slightly different, but for their height and weight as well. But the normal range, if it's below 17.5, you would think about anorexia. But if it's above 17.5, so above 17.5, is considered within normal range for BMI. But if you're having all these other symptoms, then you're going to be thinking about bulimia nervosa regardless that you're at a healthy weight.
So who is usually impacted by bulimia?
Now, bulimia mostly affects young adults, but it can affect any age. There's a 2% prevalence between 16 to 35-year-olds, and it's across all socioeconomics. So it doesn't matter if you're high or low status. There hasn't been a link found.
And is there any gender difference?
So in eating disorders overall, women are more likely to be at risk. And there are a couple of differences with binge eating, which I'll talk about. That's more
brilliant.
And with anorexia as well, with men and women. So yeah, it can happen at any age range, really. If you have traits of perfectionism, that can increase your risk of bulimia. Also, there's a sort of theory going around, if you're urban living, so you live in cities, that can also be an increased risk of bulimia nervosa. And typically, if you don't really recover or get the help you need in about 5 years, I mean, this is a general theory, then you're likely to have it quite chronically as well. Now, with
That's a shame.
It is. And the thing is with eating disorders, really on the person, you've got to want to get the help, and you can't really be forced into hospital unless you're at dangerous levels of your electrolytes, or you're at risk of death, or your BMI is such below standard that you're fainting and having these very, very serious symptoms.
Yeah. So how about anorexia? What's the difference there?
So now with anorexia, very similar with the symptoms, but your BMI is below or equivalent to 17.5. That's the main difference between bulimia and anorexia. So anorexia, you've got low body weight, as I said, with the BMI, and you have a weight loss of 15% or more of the ideal body weight for that individual. Here, again, you don't always think about food as much as bulimia, but you avoid food. You can also vomit, use laxatives, excessively exercising. So I remember when I saw a patient with anorexia, actually, and I'll just slip this in here. So she was sitting at a desk, and above the table, perfectly fine, quite calm. And then I looked below the table, and what she was doing very subtly, she was moving her legs constantly in order to lose weight, and she wouldn't stop this. So she would do this for hours. And so people didn't see this when she was at school, because they couldn't, obviously, teachers don't look under the desk. So they didn't see what she was doing. But under the desk, she was just constantly moving from the entire time when she was at school. And that's how she would try to lose weight during school time. So you have to be very careful when you're looking for the signs, because people are able to hide it sometimes. So going back to the symptoms, again, you might have this dread of fatness. You can have delayed puberty as well. And I mean, that makes sense. If you're a child with issues with anorexia and you're not getting the sufficient nutrients you need, you will be delayed in your growth, and therefore your puberty will be on hold. And for women, for girls, you might not get your period when you're meant to, and you might have abnormal periods. So you might go a long period of time of not having your periods because your body is not getting the nutrients that it needs, and the hormone imbalance is all over the place, essentially. You can get endocrine abnormalities, so you can get increased cortisol. So your body is under such stress because it doesn't have enough food and enough nutrients. So there's increased cortisol and increased growth hormone, which makes sense because your body is trying to fight almost this negative feedback in trying to let the body develop naturally against not having the nutrients. Because of the endocrine abnormalities, you can have a reduced sex drive as well, and abnormal insulin secretion. So insulin is important. So when you eat food and you've got sugar content, insulin is essentially secreted, so you have the normal amount of glucose in your body. And if you're eating in bouts or lots of sugar or snacks at one bit and then not eating, your insulin levels obviously will be up and down.
So who is more likely to be diagnosed with anorexia?
Anorexia is typically seen in adolescents, and there's a theory that it's most likely in higher social class. That's not proven in all studies though. So I mean, those of upper middle class or upper middle or first class, so they typically have anorexia. Why? Possibly because of the social status. We're not sure. And there's a 1% prevalence in teenage girls, just teenage girls, there's a 1% prevalence. Again, it's a very high heritability. So again, if someone in your family, lots of people have anorexia, you are at risk as well. And if you have OCD-like symptoms or perfectionism, again, that increases your risk of anorexia as well.
Have there been any differences seen between men and women?
Both bulimia and anorexia are more common in women. It can be seen in men. That's not to say it can't, but it's more common in women. And also of note, your occupation. So ballerinas are typically known to have eating disorders, whether that's because they're excessively exercising to such an extreme form for their work, and they have to be a certain weight, and they put that sort of stress onto themselves to look a perfect image, obviously, for the work they're doing, could be a cause of it. And it's seen also in male ballerinas as well.
Unfortunately, you saying that ballerinas are more likely to have an eating disorder doesn't really surprise me in any way.
So I'll talk about now binge eating and how that's different. Here, again, basically it's what it says. So you have these episodes of eating in binges, essentially. And this is associated with obesity, most likely. And usually you're older. So you're typically around 40 years old when people are diagnosed with this. And this is, men are also affected, but more so than in bulimia and anorexia. And about 25%, so 1 in 4 will be male with binge eating, actually.
Now that is interesting, because some of the myths on the internet state that they feel that binge eating is only really done by women who are stressed. And obviously 1 in 4, or 25% of the population of males, are impacted by binge eating. So it's not the case, is it really?
No, 1 in 4, remember, are male. So this doesn't just affect women. That's 25% are men. So that's something to really keep in mind. And it is associated with stress eating, but there are loads of other factors, as we've gone into, why this can happen. And again, it can be a stress-related eating. So if you're under a lot of stress, whether it's work or at home, you might be binge eating, secret eating.
So we've talked about the onset of eating disorders, we've talked about the signs, and we've talked about the symptoms. How about the treatment of these eating disorders?
Now, treatment for generally all of kind of eating disorders, obviously, if this is not an emergency, you can do cognitive behavioral therapy, which is specific to eating disorders. So it's tailored for those with those issues. You can do self-help. Self-help's quite big, actually, with eating disorders, trying to help yourself, because usually people don't obviously want to see a professional about this. And there can be behavioral weight programs and interpersonal therapy as well.
So an eating disorder is treatable if someone is willing to get the help that they need.
And I wanted just to let you know that so in personality disorder, there's 3 clusters, A, B, and C. And it's shown that if you have cluster C type personality disorders, which are, you have sort of obsessive compulsive personality disorder traits, you're quite dependent or quite anxious personality, then that's more common with eating disorders as well.
No, it's just interesting. It's just all of these things. I mean, I personally have issues with binge eating. Becky has had issues with anorexia in the past. She's okay now, but I'm definitely in these camps of I've been there. I'm still fighting against binge eating, and it is tough. It's not easy trying to change your mindset, particularly if it's caused by emotional upset or an emotional trigger. That is really difficult, but it's doable. I mean, I'm better than what I was. I mean, my weight ballooned after I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, because I just kind of ended up in this grief period of when I just didn't feel happy. Right. I was depressed, and I just ate because it made me feel better. But in the long run, it doesn't.
But did you feel better at the time?
I did. When I was eating it, the problem was about 5 minutes later, when I would then sit there going, well, why did you just do that for? Why did you sit there? And why is there like 50 Kit Kats around you, like empty wrappers? Because you've just stuffed yourself. It's just not helping.
Did you feel worse then when you saw that?
Definitely.
Right. And what are the kind of things you're doing to help yourself?
So at the moment, I am in the process of trying to lose weight. So I actually go to Slimming World once a week, which means that I don't have a set of scales in my house because I become obsessed. I will get on those scales about 20 times a day, and it's just not good for me. Yes. So scales have gone. I go once a week, get weighed. If it goes up, it goes up. If it goes down, fantastic. But I try not to beat myself up about it. And I have been working with my therapist with schema therapy. And so we are identifying what are the triggers. And so it's like, what is it that makes me start to eat? And it's usually triggered by something that happened when I was younger. And then I go, right, that's it, I'm stuffing my face. But I know it's not good. I know it's not the best way to handle things. And I've also decided that fill my fridge full of carrots, because if I want chocolate, that's not the best solution. Carrot sticks, I can eat those until they're going out of fashion. Hopefully not until I turn orange.
No, don't turn orange. Don't be a tango woman.
No, exactly. I'm not doing the orange thing. But yeah, so it's trying to identify what it is that is triggering me and then trying to find a better way to self-soothe.
Right. And do you mind if I ask,
No,
I mean, you don't have to answer these questions, but is there anybody also in your family that has eating disorder problems?
I mean, I believe that my mum was anorexic when she was pregnant with me, so she didn't necessarily have the best eating habits, but then she also then went through periods of binging. My dad and most of my family are generally overweight and obese, but I think some of it is definitely learned. I mean, I used to secret eat back when I was like 5 or 6 until, well, I still do it. Well, yeah.
Quite young.
Unfortunately, the way, I don't know how to explain this, but I didn't necessarily have the most emotionally stable home environment. And so
yes, and
I was left alone a lot, or I was expected to, like, from the age of like 11, 12, I was expected to cook the family meals, and I would constantly be on my own, and I would be responsible for my sister, and my dad would be in another room, my mum would be at work, so I just constantly felt alone, and the way that I dealt with that loneliness was to eat.
I mean, that goes with eating disorders actually, and thank you for sharing that, because usually it is related to something, stress, and it goes with families as well. And I remember I saw somebody who works as a doctor, and because people don't ever assume doctors have any problems, but they do, because they're human beings as well. And she was a doctor, and she had very severe anorexia, but she was so almost not delusional at all, but just didn't want to realise what was going on. And I felt that she knew what was happening, but she just refused to accept it. And in those cases, the most dangerous though, because you get in this very vicious cycle of feeling that you're not at your happy image, whatever it might be, because you feel it's a fix to control other aspects of your life if they're crumbling. And it's a way of you to control. So for instance, with her, certain aspects of her life were just uncontrollable because of whatever reason. But her eating disorder was a way that she was able to say, I'm only going to eat this, for instance, at this time, and I've got complete control of that, and no one can take that away from me, which ties in with the perfectionism and the OCD-like traits, because you're very rigid and fixed about certain things, and they need to be done, and they have to be done in order to make you feel well. But with that case, and I wanted to touch on this, it can be very serious. So there are outpatient clinics and inpatient units where people refuse to get the help, and unfortunately they need to be admitted. And it is so dangerous because, especially if you're below a BMI of 15, your increase of fractures is incredibly high, and your risk of having clots in the body because you're not hydrated is very dangerous, and you actually need to be on bed rest, almost sometimes 24 hours, because you're that at risk of fractures. Now, your risk of fractures can go down, and your morbidity and mortality.
So just a quick note about what mortality and what morbidity actually are. So mortality is the death rate associated with the condition, and morbidity is basically your overall health status. So when someone says that you have a comorbidity, it's usually that you have some kind of illness plus something else on top. So for example, diabetes and cardiovascular disease.
The earlier you seek help, you're diagnosed, and obviously you are at a healthy weight and get the healthy nutrients that you need. And again, cerebral atrophy, that can also be reversed if you eat enough and get the help you need. But it's very hard to get eating disorder individuals to get the help they need without someone pushing them, because sometimes they don't want to get the help.
Don't want to. You're like, no, I'm happy. Well, not really happy, but
not happy,
I'm dealing with life the best I can, and this is the way I've chosen to cope with it. And you take that away from me, what do I have left? So I think from my perspective, that's probably how I felt. The other issue for me is that I actually trained as a dietitian. And so I know what's good for me. I know what's bad for me. But yet I still don't necessarily take that on board, which you go, for goodness sake, you trained in this.
I know, but I'm very well, that goes with anyone, like doctors, for instance. They know that they talk about smoking, don't smoke. And I see so many doctors smoking outside. So people know. And again, it's the same. It doesn't matter, I think, whether you've been a dietitian or whether you did science or whatever. People know what you're meant to do. And it's not always so easy in real life and practicalities. Because again,
if only it was easy.
No, but I mean, unfortunately, that's life. But
the other issue is that I tend to, within chemotherapy, I don't know if you have done much on chemotherapy, but with chemotherapy, you've got all of the different schemas. And my biggest fight is defectiveness. So anything that I can go, well, that is because I'm rubbish and stupid and all of those things, I'll take it and run with it, where that's what I'm fighting against, is that the reason why I'm stuffing my face on the one hand is because it makes me feel better momentarily, but then later on I can beat myself up about it and go, why did you do that for? You're stupid, you're fat, you're those kind of things. So it's kind of that,
quite negative.
And unfortunately, I think that some of that has come from, again, my childhood and the messages that I received during my childhood. I mean, I think I was...
Do you mean messages from...
my parents and my grandparents, mainly my grandmother. She's very critical of everyone and everything. I mean, I've mentioned in a previous podcast, but I decided to, because I self-harmed, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something that's more positive than self-harm. So I went and got a tattoo. And I had not done that for years, specifically because my grandma would disapprove and she would tell me off. She's like, why would you do that for? Why would you mark your body? You can't do that. But when I think I was 11 or 12, I think she made a comment about how big I was, because obviously the secret eating, I was a large child and I couldn't deal with that. So I wrote her a letter saying how depressed and sad I was about my weight and just that comment. And instead of someone sitting down with me and going, okay, it's all right to feel this way, I just got told off. How could you do that to your grandma?
It's a really vicious cycle.
Yeah, she's the one that told me I was fat and I'm a 12-year-old. Excuse me. Sorry, it's a little bit of a bugbear of mine.
No, but I think these things are common. And again, it goes with not you, but people feeling that they can't live to a certain image or a certain role in their life, and people criticizing them and comparing them and being quite rigid and over rigid with people. And that doesn't help either, because what people need is that support and feeling confident with themselves. And again, I really, really dislike body images of people. So I'm naturally slim, that's just genetically. But that's the thing, because what annoys me about media is people are very harsh with slim individuals, but then also, that's not right in itself either. And this is just on a side note. So people can't help what body image. You can't help if you're big breasted, big hips, if you're a short man, tall man, you can't help these things. It's just natural and genetic. But what I think is to promote, and it's becoming much more common, with more curvy images of individuals on the runway. I mean, it's slowly getting there. It's going to take a very long time. It still is. But that's also to do with our mindset, because we naturally get drawn to these images as well, which doesn't help, and that needs to stop. But anyway, but what I think is promoting a healthy body, whether you're naturally slim, but in a normal healthy weight, or naturally large, but also in a healthy weight. But what I don't want is people then promoting being incredibly overweight, because actually that's very dangerous. So if you're over a BMI of 30, just like if you're below 17.5, the two ends of the scale, I don't want people promoting that, because actually that is not safe or healthy for anyone's mindset. Because just like if you have a 17.5 or below, that increases your chance of mortality and morbidity. Equally, if you're above 30, that increases your risk of so much as well, of morbidity and mortality, and especially of heart attacks.
Diabetes is huge.
And also these individuals don't mobilize as well. So that really reduces your life capacity as well. So I think it's all about balance, and we have to really be promoting a healthy mindset of what body weight is and accepted. But I don't want people out there, please, to ever pick on somebody who's naturally slim or large, because they might be in a healthy range and that's fine. But please also be aware of how you treat others, because I've noticed,
Definitely,
especially with celebrities, lots of celebrities get picked on for being a certain weight, and they might be fit and healthy and above the normal BMI, so that's fine. But please be aware. So I don't want anyone out there bullying about body images, because it's such a big topic all the time, because fashion is so huge in the Western culture, with these lovely models who are on these celebrity documentaries, and Gigi Hadid and all these lovely characters are out there. But please be aware of how you talk to others as well. That's just a side note on anyone listening.
Definitely. I mean, it's those kind of things that probably cause me to have so many issues. Like, I'm sure that's thanks to genetics. I'm quite big busted, and that's not my fault.
That's great.
It's not. It's awful. I get back pain. It's a pain sometimes, real pain. And I'm like, yeah, I'm short. I'm round. I'm trying to get my BMI down, which is for me because there is diabetes that runs in my family and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm aware of that. But when I was going through puberty, there used to be like people around me be like, oh, you got in the line for big breasts, didn't you? You were at the front of the line. I'm like, what? And literally, there's times at 16 that I think my stepdad's brother was like, whoa, you've got big breasts. And it was the first time I met him. I'm like, I'm 16 here. That's inappropriate, number one. Number two, everyone comments on that, so I'm very conscious. So my posture is very slouched, and I try and...
So hiding away.
Because I don't want to draw any more attention to that particular area. But yeah, during even now, some people do it, I just ignore them. But back then, when it's just, there's so much else going on, that's just something you don't need as a developing teenager.
No, definitely. I mean, puberty is so difficult, regardless if, you're in a happy childhood anyway. I mean, it is the most difficult process for anybody. There's hormones flying all over the place. You're going through identity, role confusion of who you are, what you want to be, your sexuality, being much more aware of your body, and hair growing in all places you've never expected. Going through all these changes, it's horrific for any individual. But these sort of comments don't help either. And people, I don't know why people do this, but getting drawn to other people's body parts. I mean, I'm very into analysis. I always think maybe they're projecting an insecurity of themselves onto another. And therefore that person is obviously taking that in and internalizing that. But, possibly, I mean, that's what I would say if I saw this uncle saying that. It's like he's clearly got some insecurity about himself and projected it onto you. But that makes me very sad, because it's so common when if someone highlights something about your own body, which is such a personal characteristic, it's your and especially your breast, that's very primitive, and that's very personal, your genitalia and that kind of thing. And for people to be looking at that, especially at an age where you're growing up and trying to understand all these limbs coming out all over the place, I mean, that just does not help with your self-confidence at all.
No. And that has a knock-on effect. And I think that's probably, I don't know, this was a few years ago. I wish I was younger, but I'm not. But yeah, I think it's changing slowly. I think it's perhaps changing too slowly, particularly for some people. And I don't know, I think it may be up to current parents to, in some ways, stand up towards people that do say things about their children's bodies at any point. I mean, no one stuck up for me and went, look, that's inappropriate, when it clearly was. I mean, come off it. That you just don't even say that. I wouldn't even consider saying that to someone any time, let alone when
who would?
Yeah, I mean, most people would be like, what on earth? Rather than, and just I don't know, just having someone to go, hang on a minute, this is their body, you don't criticise it, what do you want them to do about it? It's their body.
No, exactly.
And you're just now making them more conscious and gonna cause effects later on.
No, exactly.
And maybe it's also, in some ways, our responsibility to go, you know what? We are what we are.
No, exactly. But I think also it goes on, if you look at even like the BBC or just news reporters, I don't really see many individuals of different body shapes. They're normally naturally slim people, quite pleasant to the eye to look at. But I want to see more, individuals with disabilities, maybe deaf, blind, in a wheelchair. I really want it more expanded because people come in all different shapes and sizes, and that is normal. And I think we really need to go on just basic things like newspapers. You need to normalise it. The runway for catwalks. Where are these other models? Where are they? I don't see any models in a wheelchair coming down the catwalk. Why?
No.
And that's not life. If you go down your street, you're going to see somebody with a Zimmer frame or whatever it might be. Everyone is.
You might see me.
You might see me. Like you might see anybody. But this needs to also go, in the public eye as well. And it can't just be education at home. And I agree with that because people still refer to what's being stimulated on the outside, and what's being stimulated on the outside is, radio, film, newspapers, TV. And if that's not shown on there, we're not going to see that as normal. We're going to see that as that's what should be normal. Sorry. So this really needs to come from everybody. But it is taking so long. And this goes back to, the Victorian ages. Women had to dress a certain way. If you think about it, the corsets, women putting powder on their faces, women really extensively pulling their hair back so their foreheads were bigger. There was a phase where they thought really large women, back in the day of the Greeks and the Romans, meant fertility. So they meant their womb was more fertile because they were more curvy. And then it went to a whole stage of being, very, very slim, almost flat chested, that kind of model, very gaunt face look. And then women back in the day used to put these eye drops that actually cause your increase of being blind because they want their pupils to be bigger.
Wow.
Yeah, to make their eyes bigger, to be more appealing and attractive. And all that happened, the sunlight would go in their eyes and their pupils could not constrict, so they would go blind. So
nice.
Fashion in all different ways has, been over hundreds and hundreds of years, and it still hasn't changed. I don't think it's going to change for a very long time. If it hasn't by now, I think we've still got hundreds of years to go.
Unfortunately, I completely agree. I mean, I have to confess, I bought a while ago, I had a bike and a rower, and I would purposely watch films or TV with really skinny people running around to spur me on, going, I can do this. I'm going to look like that particular actress one day if I just keep going. And there are probably days when I was probably on this exercise bike for 4 or 5 hours, because I was like, one day I'm going to get there. And I'm like, you know what? Is it really worth it in some ways?
No, what annoys me about these exercise shows is they pick naturally already sort of at that size. So you might get already these actresses that are actually naturally slim anyway, and then say, oh, I've done these exercises and this is how I look.
Look at me now.
But what I would like to see is somebody that wants to be a certain weight. So say, I don't know, their BMI is 32, so above what's considered normal.
Mine is 33, just putting it out there.
Okay, so let's go with 33. So I want to see somebody with a BMI, for instance, of 33 that wants to be, I don't know, 28. Okay,
that'd be nice.
And I would want to see them in these exercise videos from episode 1 to episode whatever it is, 30.
That'd be awesome.
And to see physically the transformation in these exercise classes. But I have never seen an exercise video like that. So
maybe that's somewhere that I can get in on the action.
Maybe you should be starting your exercise class videos. I think that's what, honestly, why? I think that would be much more helpful to see the changes right in front of you, because you always see these before and after
pictures. Isn't
really?
Like
is this before and after?
Yeah.
So maybe that's something you need to start on, Sydney.
Well, I'm also sat there going, whenever I do watch these exercise videos and stuff, they're always pristinely made up. There's
I
no
know.
sweat.
I don't go to the gym
red.
with makeup. Like,
I go
don't know where this
bright
comes
red.
from.
I look like I'm dying. I probably am dying at points because it's just that horrific. And yeah, and they're just like, just walking around and they look amazing. I'm like, I hate you right now.
I know. But it's like the package. It's like if you go to a supermarket, I always say it's just the package makeup, and you see, let's give an example. So let's say you see a cake, okay, and it's just a simple chocolate cake. And if the package is very beautiful and pristine compared to the exact same cake in a cardboard box, you're going to go for the nice, beautiful package, aren't you? It's just
More
about
than
package
likely,
sell, unfortunately. But I hope at some point in the future, everybody has this good mindset, this healthy mindset of it doesn't matter what package you're in, as long as you're healthy on the inside and out, but not to judge others.
That would be wonderful. That really would.
That's the recipe, I think, that we all need.
We should somehow write this somewhere going, this is what we're aiming for. This is, I'm just sat again. Yeah, that's what I want. So I found, again, I should stop Googling, really, is what I should. I found, again, some interesting information about
I think I'm going to take away your laptop.
No, I'll cry. That this is what people are saying about binge eating in particular. I think maybe we'll do a specific episode because we do have a book coming up on anorexia and do a bit more about the myths of anorexia when we get to that book, if that's all right.
Yeah,
but just
perfect.
for the binge eating, people think that it isn't a real disorder because, let's face it, most of us have probably sat down and eaten an entire family-size bucket of chicken or something. I don't know. And as a result of that, they just think, oh, it's not really real. And from my perspective, if it was just a giant bag of crisps or if it was just one tub of ice cream, that would be awesome. I would take that any day. But when I've eaten a whole entire box of Celebrations and then I've bought some more Celebrations to replace the Celebrations that I ate, and then I've eaten all of those, and then I've had to do it again, and the cycle's repeated. That's kind of more binge eating, I personally think. I don't know, what do you think?
No, I mean, that's completely true. Everybody, and this is what you need to remember, of course, so I've eaten, Ben and Jerry's in one sitting.
That's just naughty. I mean,
it's very. Well, I don't regret any of it. But
was it good, Ben and Jerry's? What flavour?
It was it the cookie one? Yeah, I don't regret it at all. Yeah. So anyway, everybody has episodes where they briefly, mildly binge. But what binge eating disorder is, which is a disorder, is a diagnosis. That is when you are repeatedly doing these excessive episodes of binge eating, and it can affect your life also. So it's repeated amount of binge eating. It's not, oh, I've eaten an entire packet of crisps, that large sensation packet or something. It's continuous binge eating repeatedly that is affecting obviously your health and your lifestyle.
Definitely impacts my health. As I've said, my BMI is 33, but I am in the process of trying to get rid of it. So I want to be, as you said, 28, but ideally I want to be lower than that. But it's a case of at points when it's got that bad, I plan my day around eating and also what places I can stop at to get the food that I want to binge on.
Well, that's the thing, because you're thinking about food, you're craving the food, it's always on your mind.
Yeah, it's constant. And literally we've come up with ideas of, if you go to the petrol station to fill up your car, pay at the pump, because then you don't go inside and I can't buy anything, and kind of like those kind of strategies.
See, exactly. So these thoughts don't, come into other people's mind that don't have binge eating disorder. Like when I finished my Ben and Jerry's, I didn't have a mindset of, right, I've got to go right now and get another tub. I have to eat that now.
Yeah, that's me.
Because I'm fixated. Yeah. Exactly. So people that don't have this obviously don't have these symptoms. So clearly, I mean, that's a perfect example you gave, actually, that I've got to pay at a pump. I've got to change my lifestyle in order to prevent me from craving and eating something and binge eating on it.
Yeah, I mean, what was it yesterday? I was sending Lawrence's messages going, get me some of those Galaxy golden eggs. I don't know if you've seen them. They're the bane of my life at the moment. And he's like, do you really want them? I'm like, yes, but no. So I'm
Gosh,
like,
and
don't
Easter
do it.
coming up, exactly.
I'm like
it's the
not
worst
doing it, not doing
thing.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was like,
it's all about self-motivation as well.
Yeah, I think that ensuring that I get weighed each week is that motivation of making me try and consciously process the eating, because there are times when I find myself eating and I'm not even like realising it and I'm not enjoying it, and I'm like, there's more to life than this.
Absolutely.
It is not fair. Thin people get to eat whatever they want whenever they want. That's true in some ways, I do think that. But then sometimes I look at people and they're not eating anything. And you sit there and you go, you may be skinny, but are you really enjoying life? Because you're not really eating. So
that goes with what I said as well. People looking at naturally slim people, and we all do it, judging them. So I'll make it a personal,
isn't it?
Yeah. So I'll make a personal thing. So because I'm from a naturally slim family, I mean, that's just genetic, but I've been judged on that, and I eat, really healthy. I love food. I love trying all different recipes and stuff. But that again goes with people's mindset on judging others. And it's not about naturally slim people or thin, however you want to say it, eat a lot and it doesn't affect them. Again, you firstly don't know that person's lifestyle. They could be exercising. They could just actually have a high metabolism rate. And so everyone is different. So for instance, if somebody also has hyperthyroidism, they lose weight very quickly and they're very naturally slim people. And that's a medical problem. So I don't like people judging others when they don't know what's going on, because some people also have medical conditions. And also, even if you have, say, the opposite, hypothyroidism, you can be larger. So then people then judge just equally the other way. People judge people who are larger, thinking, oh, they're lazy, they're not exercising, not eating right. But again, you do not know what's happening in that person's life. Their metabolic rate might not be at a good standard. They might have a medical problem as well. They might be on medication making them put on weight or lose weight. It goes both ways.
Exactly. Another one that I've got is that people who binge eat may feel like it's their fault and that they've done this to themselves and they don't deserve care from others, which I think is really sad.
I think that is sad. And I think to a certain element, it can be true in some cases, actually, because something is happening in their life, or multivaried, as it always is, or it could be genetic. But there's some sort of stress and they don't feel in control possibly. And that's why they're trying to binge to release themselves. And that could be true. It's individual as well, that there's something missing in their life and they're not supported. So in a certain way, I agree with that.
Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast to talk to us today about eating disorders. If you guys out there have any questions about eating disorders, please let us know. As I said, we will be doing other episodes around eating disorders. So this one was really focusing on binge eating. Our next one will probably be more on anorexia. And once I find a book that focuses on bulimia, we will do a bit more on that topic as well. If you have any additional questions about anything that you would like to ask the psychiatrist, please get in contact with us. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and at our website, which is mentalhealthbookclub.com. Equally, you can reach out directly to the Secret Psychiatrist, which you can find on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at her website, thesecretpsychiatrist.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please share that with your family and friends and let them know about the Mental Health Book Club. And we hope that you all have a fantastic week, and we'll be back next week. And remember, it's okay to not be okay, and if you're not okay, talk. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you need additional help with your mental health, please contact the Samaritans on 116-123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next book will be 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher, and our next episode with the Secret Psychiatrist will be about depression and suicide. If you'd like to find out more about the MHBC podcast, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We really hope that you enjoy this podcast, and we would like to hear what you think. Please head over to Twitter, follow us at MHBC_podcast, or head over to Facebook and follow our Facebook page, which is Mental Health Book Club. If you would like to show your support further, please share us with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. We are now on Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/MHBC to donate as little as $2 a month to the Mental Health Book Club podcast. As a result of your donation, you will get early access to some of our episodes, you will get specific episodes that are only for patrons, and you'll be eligible to be entered into free prize draws.